We're live. All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the April 22nd, 2020 Mayfield Board of Education meeting. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure everybody is aware that due to the current COVID-19 crisis, we are currently in compliance with the Ohio Department of Health stay-at-home order, and we're conducting this meeting remotely. We're able to conduct this meeting based on the temporary authorization provided in House Bill 197. This provision is permitting the boards of education to hold meetings remotely, and the members of the boards will be considered present regardless of whether they attend in person or remotely, and their votes will be counted for the purpose of determining quorum. The bill declares that any resolution, rule, or formal action taken shall have the same effect as it had occurred during a typical in-person meeting. And if for any reason a board member loses connection, we're going to stop the meeting until the board member becomes connected again and we're able to all proceed with the meeting. This bill also permits the board to fulfill the public access requirement for open meetings by providing members of the public with remote access to the meeting. And the bill provides examples of this type of remote access technologies. So tonight we're streaming this meeting live on YouTube. The Mayfield Board of Education believes that the public schools should be able to observe and hear all discussions and deliberations regardless of whether the board members participate in person or remotely. So with that being said, I would like to thank the Mayfield School District's IT staff led by John Duplay for making sure that we're all set up and properly conducting this meeting according to these temporary requirements. So, Mr. Snyder, can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, Mr. Finaro.
Here.
Ms. Grosek.
Here.
Mr. Hess.
Here.
Mr. Hughes.
Here.
Mr. Teresi.
Here.
Thank you. And we're going to move to the Pledge of Allegiance. We believe that the pledge is important in our meetings. It's a little tougher when we're doing it remotely. We are going to, we all are standing. We all, in our minds, it's hard to do it remotely, but we will do it with intentions of being standing while we say this pledge. So I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the
republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So our next, let's see. So next on our agenda is we move to our board president's remarks. I have a couple remarks, and then when I'm done, if any of the other board members have anything that they want to say afterwards, please feel free to do so, and then we'll move on with the meeting. So with the governor's announcement on Monday of remote learning continuing for the remainder of the school year, I just wanted to extend my appreciation and support for the students, parents, the district staff, my fellow board members, and the communities in Mayfield Heights School District as we continue to deal with this crisis. This came on us suddenly. There wasn't much time for our district, our students, and their families to plan and be prepared for what we didn't know was coming. But what put us in a good position to deal with this crisis is that over the past several years, the Mayfield School Board and district leadership made a major commitment to change the model of the classroom for the future. We moved away from the industrial age classroom to a future classroom that encompasses all types of learning and ways to learn, which we're calling all access learning. We didn't know it several years ago that what we were working on as a district would set us up to be somewhat prepared for this crisis. But the technological infrastructure that had to be built to support what we are doing now is amazing. Our IT staff has worked very hard to make sure this was reliable and safe. And providing Chromebooks to all 5th through 12th grade students was a major undertaking and initiative for this district. Teachers and support staff had to change and commit to this new type of learning and are using this effectively as students are now working remotely. The stories of what is happening throughout the district are amazing and inspiring. And I would like to thank everyone for what they are doing to help students continue their education during this time. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that none of this would be possible without the support of our residents and our communities. We are truly blessed by their commitment to our school district. We've all had to pivot to make changes and sacrifices in our daily lives, and yet with all this, there appears more challenges that we must continue to face and overcome in the days ahead. But what I'm sure of, and I know with my heart, I am proud. I'm proud to be part of this Mayfield School District, this community. I'm proud of the administrators and the staff, students and their families, and our community members and partners. I wish everyone the best in the days to come, and together we will get through this Mayfield strong. So if anybody has any other comments, please feel free.
Ronnie, I just want to thank you, our world heroes. They are superheroes. They just don't wear capes. They wear masks and protective gear. They have been working tirelessly while risking their own lives each and every day. So I say a heartfelt thank you to our first responders who are on the front line both day and night, to our parents who had a crash course in math online, to our teachers and always spend countless hours preparing and caring for our students, our administrators who have crafted solutions to help everyone stay safe and keep learning, and to our seniors who have missed out on all fun and excitement of a normal, exciting senior enjoying their prom, their after prom, and their senior walk at commencement. But I thank you all.
Thanks, Jimmy. Any other comments?
I think you two covered it beautifully. We are very fortunate and very lucky to live in the Mayfield community and have constituents, staff, administration, the whole Mayfield family wrap its arms around each other virtually and get the job done.
Hear, hear.
Thanks, Sue. Anything else? All right. So I want to thank Ms. Grosek for providing us with our goals this year. We all had a chance to review them, made any comments. Are there any other discussions on the goals? If not, I will ask that Mr. Snyder, that you enter those into our minutes for tonight's meeting.
Will do.
Thank you. And that brings us to the superintendent's announcements.
Well, I'd like to thank the board for all those comments. I was going to mention many of the same things. First, I want to wish everybody out there well. You know, I hope you're well. I hope you're staying safe. You know, as I talk to our medical professionals in the region, it is the safety protocols and the stay-at-home order and our abilities to maintain social distancing is working according to the research. So I just want to encourage everyone to continue those practices, continue to wash your hands and remain socially distant and be respectful of others. Our staff, our administrators, our leaders, our teachers have been absolutely magnificent during this time, as have our students and their parents as well. It's been challenging for all. And we received many emails and compliments, phone calls, you know, regarding how things are going. And there are some challenges still, and some students are struggling, and we acknowledge that, and we pour every resource we can into helping those families and those students as they struggle through this time. And I just want to give a shout out to the seniors, the senior class. You know, they're not able to enjoy, you know, the usual things that seniors participate in this time of year, even if it means just walking up and down the halls, enjoying their last few moments in high school, hugging their teachers and smiling and enjoying one another in a cafeteria, whatever it may be. And I'm just really proud of you for the way you've handled this. And as you know, we're doing all kinds of things on Facebook. We have some signage out around the community also to recognize you. And we are working on alternative plans for your graduation ceremony, for the prom, for the senior banquet, and other things as well, for the award ceremonies. So hang in there, seniors. We really respect for the way you're handling all this, and we know you're missing these final days. But you are a terrific group of people. You're going to do great things in this world, and you're going to help solve problems like this that we're facing right now in the futures, because you're also wonderfully talented.
Thank you. So we're moving on to our community communications section. Our first order of business is going to be voting on a resolution to suspend that, to suspend the community communications during this time that we're doing remote meetings, however long that's going to be. But the Mayfield Board of Education recognizes the value of the school governance and of public comment on educational issues. It is important to us that we allow members of the public to express themselves on school matters and school interests. So to meet this expectation, community members may submit questions regarding board agenda items to Ms. Lori Euler, our Community Relations Director. The questions that are received addressing a board agenda item will be responded to by email. We send this notice out with every meeting notice that we have when the agenda goes out. So when it goes out and our meeting notices go out on Friday, the agenda goes out on the Friday before our meeting. If anybody has any items on the next meeting, I'll look at the agenda items and please pose your questions so that you can get a response to them. So with that being said, we will find our agenda. Here we go. We are, I will make the motion to approve the resolution to suspend the community communications due to the coronavirus. I will need a second.
RECESSION seconds the motion.
Roll call, please.
Mr. Grosek,
Yes.
Mr. Hess,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
yes,
Mr. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Finaro.
Yes. Our next section is our board member committee reports. Are there any reports tonight?
None.
No.
no,
Thank you. And that brings us to our presentation. Mr. Snyder is going to present school finances and the COVID-19 impact.
Yeah. I need to first share my screen. Dr. Kelly, do I have that option correct?
You do?
Okay, I will share it now, and I will walk through the presentation and entertain questions along the way. Let me go ahead and start the PowerPoint.
It is showing.
Oops, let me page back to the beginning. Sorry. Does everybody see the screen just so before I begin?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. This will be a brief update I've been asked a lot of questions about what is the potential impact of COVID-19 on district resources. So some of this presentation is derived from a presentation that we received from Forecast 5, which is a private entity. But there was a lot of good content, and we took the content and we applied it to Mayfield schools. So just a couple of slides to go through quickly. Overview of the current conditions. You know, it's very speculative how long this economic disruption is going to continue. The degree of the economic downturn will be related to the length of the current restrictions and restraints on the economic activity. You know, a recession may be unavoidable if most normal day-to-day activities are not resumed by sometime in May. The economic conditions may likely deteriorate for a longer period of time. And we'll make some great recession from a number of years ago, references along the way. And that the fact that we have federal stimulus intervention forthcoming, we're seeing small businesses, they reintroduced more resources into that pipeline. Depending upon the distribution model of these stimulus dollars, I'm calling that for the lack of a better terminology, it may or may not have a direct impact on the district. And again, it depends on how they determine the distribution methodology, whether or not it's based on socioeconomic factors and how we compare relative to other districts. To compare and contrast this to the current conditions and those involving the Great Recession, you know, one of the big underlying factors here is this is more medically driven. The Great Recession was really driven by stresses in the housing and financial market or industries, which then really permeated the economic activity in this country. there was essentially a 3-year lag from the time in which it started in 06 until it began impacting, I would say, the Midwestern states, since most of this started on the coast, the Great Recession that is, and found its way to the interior of the country. We began seeing some signs of slowing in 07, and when applying this to how it impacted the state of Ohio in 09, the state's rainy day fund was being utilized to help offset its losses. So they began deficit spending early. Today, the state is sitting on $2.7 billion and has yet to begin its deficit spending. However, they are projecting right now that certain income factors, sales tax and income tax statistics, are starting to trend under expectations, and that variance could be going into next fiscal year for them, or the next calendar year, I should say, a 10 to 20% reduction. At least that's what they're telling us now. But the basic metrics and the basic measures, if you will, are different from the Great Recession. And I'll explain here in a moment how I think that that's going to impact the district in these two key revenue categories. The Great Recession, again, lagged. This pandemic, it could be more immediate since it's already here. The stay-at-home has been in Ohio. We received that, essentially for the entire month of April. Economic activity has slowed down. The district's two key revenue categories for operations are local property taxes and state aid. With respect to local property taxes, we receive about 89% of our funding, or $64 million annually, to fund our $70 million operation. The concern here is any disruption in property tax collections, meaning a rise in delinquencies. And I'll show you in a moment, for every 1% reduction in collections is a $600,000 reduction in revenue. We don't believe that we're going to see anything this fiscal year, a disruption, since most of the property taxes were billed and collected for the fiscal year, which would be beginning July 1 to June 30th. We also don't anticipate any rise in delinquencies. We don't necessarily feel like there will be any reductions or any adjustments to our property valuations, since this isn't necessarily an economic recession that's driving this. It's more of a pandemic. And most of the property valuation was impacted during the last recession, have been essentially right-sized back to the levels pre-recession. And what I mean by that is we're still not above that waterline yet before the 2006 recession began. So we still our values haven't eclipsed that level from that point. State aid, 4%, $3 million. We don't anticipate the state taking that money away at this point. They have passed their biennium budget this is year one of 2 years. So we don't think that we'll see any reductions there. However, going into the next biennial period, which would be 22-23, there could, possibly be a 10 to 20% reduction based on current projections of revenue, which equates to $300,000 to $600,000 annual loss. Again, just conjecture, just a projection, just to give folks a sense of where there could be some risk. This is a graphical depiction of the Great Recession, and what we're attempting to illustrate here is the recession began in 06, and the apex on that within the interior of the country, it hit the national level in 08. The TARP dollars, the banks that were too big to fail, all of those levers were pulled. It then dragged into the middle of the country in 09. And in essence, what we're illustrating here is the normal collection rate for current billed and assessed property taxes is about 96%. As you'll notice, if you see fiscal year 14 and through 2018, it was 96, 97%. So any reduction from that point, and you can see during that 5-year period, our collections fell because folks were struggling with their own economics, their own financial impacts of this. So what we're demonstrating here is the difference between a normal collection rate of 96.6% versus the 5 years in question. It basically totaled $5.6 million of revenue that was not necessarily lost, and that's kind of a misleader there. It was delinquent. So the delinquencies rose, which meant that those delinquencies were collected at a later date. However, we had to make adjustments to deal with $5.6 million of revenue that did not come in. I'm not suggesting that this is going to be the future. This is just looking back at the Great Recession as somewhat of an intuitive model to see how this might play out moving forward. Budget implications. People, I mentioned the revenue side, which we just referenced. There's some discussions out there about how this might be saving districts money. The fact that we're not in session, the fact that some entities are furloughing staff. What I've listed are the categories that we could potentially realize some savings. I'm going to put an asterisk next to that word, because we're continuing to operate as if school is in session, and because the board had the leadership and the wisdom to permit us to continue to pay our employees. And certainly Dr. Kelly suggested that we should continue to do so. The unions were all working together, all rowing in the same direction. The main area where savings can be realized in the school district budget is if we don't pay people, but we're doing that. And I think we're also hopefully not helping to have a positive impact on our local economies, because our folks are still being able to buy goods and services. But in these categories listed, substitutes, overtime, or what I'm calling on-demand pay, meaning based on something, diesel fuel is a big area where we are saving because we're not driving our buses. We do contract for some transportation in some areas. That savings, and I said to Dr. Kelly earlier, actually yesterday, I think we can probably realize, just looking at these areas, between 0.5% to 1% of total budget savings, which then is between $350,000 to $700,000 of annualized savings. However, that number is listed as, or considered gross, because we're maintaining our food service employees, and they're losing revenue on about $6,000 a day. So we're filling that hole. We're also looking at refunding students that paid for trips, and there's dollars there that could be lost. We're also evaluating student fees and making certain that in order to help our needy families, maybe we waive the collections of those. So those dollars have to be overcome. So we believe the net, the true savings target is going to be around 0.5%, but those dollars are also likely not going to be realized because of additional technology needed at home, because of making certain that we may have to, we're having to purchase additional technology, cleaning the buildings to make certain they're sanitized, and creating new spaces in which folks can maintain social distancing going into next year. So I'm going to basically state that our goal should be to be expenditure neutral in all of this. I don't know, Dr. Kell, if you want to comment on any of that I just mentioned.
Well, I think that's an excellent analysis, and it's realistic. I think it's a great point to make that while we can perceive some savings, the reality is that those savings will be eaten up by other factors, in adjusting to this period of time, as you've explained. So it's a great explanation.
Thank you. And the final slide in all of this are just final thoughts. The COVID-19 economic impacts will affect at least this current year and certainly into fiscal year 21, as in next year. Obviously, the far-reaching implications will depend on stay-at-home orders, economic activity predominantly, and this is really a financial presentation. It's not a school operations presentation. We need to continue to carefully review all major line items of revenue. I mentioned the two. And expenditure possibilities, which right now we are looking at next school year in a variety of phases. And obviously our goal is to educate kids, and that will likely look different if this continues. So we'll continue to monitor those. And I think finally, the thing that we are certainly blessed with, and which will give us some opportunity to remain calm, to evaluate the situation that continues to present itself, is that we've got strategic cash reserves, and we are sitting on dollars, albeit we've made a lot of good strategic decisions. Certainly the Board of Education has been very willing and certainly supportive of the 4 pillars that are presented by Dr. Kelly, and that we are in a position to continue to pay our folks, to educate our kids, to not do anything drastic by way of reductions or cuts, to be thoughtful about what next year looks like, whatever cascading or variety of options that we might deploy. And we can do those very strategically without actually hopefully impacting the financial projections, certainly not asking for additional taxes at this time, and being thoughtful about with our community. So that I think goes back to all the comments that were made at the beginning, how fortunate we are to be in this district. And as I said to a colleague yesterday, Great Recession, pandemic, I never thought in my personal lifetime that I would have to deal with these 2 crises almost back to back. And I can only imagine certainly with the rest of you and our students. And I have a senior this year, and these are odd times. And I I think we're very fortunate to be able to deal with them in the fashion that we have. I'll entertain any questions along the way. That concludes my presentation, but certainly entertain any questions.
I do have one question, but I want to just reiterate what you said here, that as a district, everything that we do, everything that you guys look at and do is not looking short-sighted. We're looking in the future and we're looking ahead, and those cash reserves, as we look at and talk about constantly, they're going to help us out, I think, a little bit during this to remain calm and not to overreact, as you had mentioned in your presentation. It was a great presentation that gave us a lot of information that we had talked about, what we were looking at our last meeting. Are there any projections on what delinquencies could be? Has anybody projected that at all?
No, normally our delinquency collections, if you will, are around 2% annually. So we receive about between $1 million and $1.2 million. And that, when added to that 97% annual or normally current billed collection, we're around 99%. I'm thinking that 93.5 during the Great Recession will be the low point. So between where we're at now at 97 and 93.5%, I think that could be the floor. Just by using historical data. So 3.5% likely 1 year could be that rise. I think that's worst case scenario. I think we could probably, no one's projected it, Ron, but I'm guessing we'll probably be somewhere between 1 and 3.5.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, and I'll pause for a moment, I will stop sharing this presentation. And Dr. Kelly, it's back to you, or I'm sorry, Mr. Finaro, it's back to you.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks for that presentation. So our next item is item 8, our superintendent's consent agenda, letters A through, let's get through it here.
G, I believe.
A through G. Yep, A through G. So I'll make the motion to approve this. Is there a second?
Sue seconds.
Thank you. Roll call, Mr. Snyder.
Ms. Grosek,
Yes.
Mr. Hess,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
yes,
Mr. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Finaro.
Yes. Our next item is the graduation list of graduates for approval. And, what Dr. Kelly had said goes for all of us earlier, what he had mentioned about the graduates. But, I'd like to congratulate the seniors for persevering through a situation that no other Mayfield graduate class has ever had to go through. My hope is that in the near future, we'll all be able to get together to celebrate their achievements. So with that, I'll make the motion to accept the class of 2002 Mayfield High School graduates. Do I have a second?
Jimmy
Sue.
seconds.
Oh, Jimmy got it. All right, I'll third.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Grosek,
Yes.
Mr. Hess,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
yes,
Mr. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Finaro.
Yes. Our next item is our treasurer.
If you could see my little clap sign up there for our
I
senior
s-
class.
Yeah, we see it.
Congratulations, seniors.
Great
Hope
job.
to see
Real
you.
now.
Hope to see you all soon. Our next item is our treasurer's report. I motion to approve that. Do I have a second?
George second,
Roll call, please.
Ms. Grosek,
Yes.
Mr. Hess,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
yes,
Mr. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Finaro.
Yes. Under that same subject, we have financial transactions. I'll move to approve that. Do I have a second?
Al will second.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Grosek,
Yes.
Mr. Hess,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
yes,
Mr. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Finaro.
Yes. In the treasurer's business, we have minutes of our regular board meeting, March 18th, 2020, and the special board meeting, April 7th, 2020. I'll
I
move to,
think we missed donations.
There aren't any.
There aren't any.
With Arte, okay, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Looking at the list.
So I'll move to approve those minutes. Do I have a second?
Give me seconds.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Grosek,
Yes,
Mr. Hess,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
yes,
Mr. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Finaro.
Yes. Item B, our 2020-2021 course catalog for the Mayfield High School. I move that motion. Is there a second?
George second,
Mr. Snyder, roll call, please.
Ms. Grosek,
yes,
Mr. Hess,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
yes,
Mr. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Finaro.
Yes. Then item C, our 2020-2021 health insurance rates. I'll make the motion to move this through. Do I have a second?
Sue
Give
will
me
second.
seconds.
Ms. Grosek seconded. I think she was first in.
Yeah, that's good.
Third.
She was louder.
She was louder.
I have-
Any discussion on this? Any comments?
You know, the rates, if you'll notice, no increases in dental, vision, and life. We did have a 7.72% increase in our medical. We have a 7% rate cap, which built into our negotiated agreements with all of our bargaining units, which means that 0.72% is 100% paid by the employee. It doesn't equate to a large dollar value, but it demonstrates the fact that we've got provisions and we've got a good relationship with our bargaining units. And this is just another illustration of that. And the rates came in. We feel really good about the rates. We just had a couple rough claims.
Okay. Now roll call, please.
Ms. Grosek,
Yes,
Mr. Hess,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
yes,
Mr. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Finaro.
Yes. Item D, provider appointment for school transportation driver physicals. I make the motion to approve that. Is there a second?
Al will second.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Grosek,
yes,
Mr. Hess,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
yes,
Mr. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Finaro.
Yes. Item E, we're removing from the table from our previous meeting, arrangement program agreement, KCE Champions LLC. I'll make the motion. I have a second.
Jimmy will second.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Grosek,
yes,
Mr. Hess,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
yes,
Mr. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Finaro.
Yes. And then that takes us to the arrangement program agreement with KCE Champions LLC. I'll make the motion to approve it. Do I have a second?
Sue will second.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Grosek,
Yes,
Mr. Hess,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
yes,
Mr. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Finaro.
Yes. Under G, addendum number 2, excess workers' compensations insurance. I'll make the motion to approve. I have a second.
George,
Jimmy will second.
Mr.
Or
Hughes.
George.
Mr. Hughes,
Yes.
okay.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Grosek,
yes,
Mr. Hess,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
yes,
Mr. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Finaro.
Yes. Item H, addendum number 2, 2020-2021 consumable fees K through 12. Addendum attachment 13. I'll make the motion for approval. Do we have a second?
Jimmy will second.
Give me seconds.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Grosek,
yes,
Mr. Hess,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
yes,
Mr. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Finaro.
Yes. And then on other business, we have in memoriam, Patricia Stevenson Kurzel passed away at the age of 89 in February of 2020. Patricia served Mayfield City Schools well for 25 years at both Mill Ridge and Gates Mills Elementary Schools. condolences are extended to the family of Patricia Stevenson Kurzel. Are there any other items for the meeting before we motion for adjournment?
Would, Mr. Finaro, I'd like to welcome 2 new members to the Mayfield family, if they're
Sure.
out there watching. I know we have approximately 25 people watching us tonight. I want to welcome Larry Lurch to the family. Larry will be serving as the Assistant Transportation Director. And Anthony Satullo, who is a Mayfield grad. Great, fine young man, will be approved as Assistant Technology Director. As you know, Anthony Giannetti went on to take on a director's position. We're wishing him very well. He's doing a great job already out there. So we welcome both of these men to our administrative team and to the Mayfield family.
Thank you. Yes, welcome everybody. Any other comments? Then I will move to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Jimmy will second.
I wasn't loud enough.
You weren't loud enough. Sue.
Not that time.
I'm sorry.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Grosek,
Yes.
Mr. Hess,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes,
yes.
Mr. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Finaro.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Great job tonight. And we'll be probably live again on YouTube on May 20th. So everybody have a good night. Thank you.
And everybody look outside. It's snowing.
Yeah.
Bye.
Be safe.
Be well.
Healthy.
Bye.